Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first Insider's View of the fall semester. I'm Harry Chapman, and we're going to be visiting with Steve Taylor. His body of work covers a lot of areas, and I'm sure many of you know some of those areas that Steve has worked in. As a recording artist, he's sold over 1 million records worldwide. He's earned 2 Grammy nominations for Meltdown, that was in 1984, and Squint in 1993, and made history as the only artist to twice win Billboard Music Video Awards for self-directed music videos. Steve also was a lead singer and co-writer in the MCA-signed modern rock band, Chagall Guevara. He produced resumes include the platinum-certified Sixpence None the Richer, featuring the hit Kiss Me, which many of you may know, and There She Goes. 3 gold-certified albums for Newsboys and tracks for Reliant K and Third Day. Now, Steve's parallel career as a filmmaker began in college, and matter of fact, he majored in filmmaking, I think, in college at Colorado, and he includes his videos for Sixpence None the Richer, Kiss Me, the long-form Newsboys comedy Down Under the Big Top, and the award-winning Squint movies from the soundtrack 2006. He also directed the feature film and produced the feature film The Second Chance, which many of you may know, that starred Michael W. Smith. It was an award-winning drama that was distributed nationally and theatrically by Sony Pictures. He's currently has wrapped production on his film Blue Like Jazz, which many of you may have been extras in that film because some of it was shot around Nashville, Tennessee. Would you please welcome Steve Taylor to the Insider's View? You know, it's great to have you here. In that film, you shot some of it here in Nashville as well as Portland, and
yes.
Used some of probably Belmont.
That's right. Actually, most of it was shot in Nashville. A lot of it at Scarrett Bennett, and there was a lot of Belmont students that kind of rescued us because they really did a great job of being our extras and dressing up for parties. And every once in a while, we'd rap like at 4 in the morning, and then a bunch of us would go over to Coco's afterward and just hang out. So I have a great debt of gratitude to Belmont students for filling out the crowds in this movie.
You know, the Blue Like Jazz, written by Don Miller, which was a great success, a bestseller. But the thing about that book is many people said they didn't think it could be made into a movie. What made you decide, I can do that?
Right. Well, it's not a book. How many of you read Blue Like Jazz? What have you? Right, okay. It's not a book that you put down and think, oh, I see this movie in my head. But I finished it. I just finished the last movie and was trying to figure out what to do next, and someone gave me the book over Christmas. And when I finished it, I wanted this to be my next movie. There's a famous scene that happens in a confession booth that if you've read the book, you know about. And my idea was I want to end the movie with the confession booth. But the trick of it is in the book, Don Miller is a 32-year-old Christian writer who moves from Houston to Portland and lives nearby Reed College, gets interested in it, so he starts auditing some classes at Reed College. And it's a great story in the book, but that's not really a movie story, you know, the story of a Christian writer in his 30s who audits classes.
Something's wrong with him, right?
Yeah, right. It might even come off a little creepy on film. So, so I pitched Don on the idea of what if we made your character a 19-year-old college student who lives the experience, and he was up for it. So he actually went to work on the screenplay with myself and a longtime collaborator, Ben Pearson.
So it obviously came off well. You know, one of the surprises I think about this movie was the financing on it, because I don't know, many of you know, and I learned the term Kickstarter today. I had not heard about that, but I knew there was an internet thing because you didn't have money to do it. So talk to me about the Kickstarter process and how surprised you were by that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I mean, I've been involved in entertainment for a long time, and you know, we've had a few not so great things happen, but for the most part, it's been, you know, reasonably successful and some big successes. I had never had any project that I thought was so obvious as a Blue Like Jazz movie. We finished the screenplay. There was a really strong screenplay from the beginning. We thought, well, we've got a book based on a big, New York Times bestseller, or 1.3 million copies sold. How hard can this be? It's not going to be an expensive movie to make.
Right.
And we set about trying to raise money for the movie, and we could not get anybody to fund it. And we spent over 3 years going around to people thinking this would be obvious, and nobody wanted to fund it. We finally found a guy in Seattle who was up for putting some money up, and then late in the game, we were in a situation where our lead actor, Marshall Allman, had to go back to work on True Blood starting in right after Thanksgiving. So we had a window where we had to get the movie shot, or we were going to lose him for another year. So we managed to find one other investor who put up another $250,000. We cobbled together like, I don't know, $600,000-$700,000. And the day before the office was supposed to open, the new investor dropped out. So I called up Don and I said, man, you're not going to believe this, but after all this time, this guy dropped out. I don't know what we're going to do, but we don't have enough money to get this going. And of course, Don was really bummed out too. We put so much time and effort into making this happen, and it had been such a haul trying to get it going. And so unbeknownst to me, he blogged about it the next morning, and he has a pretty substantial following, and he just essentially put out the word, look, sorry, this movie that we've been telling you about for the last 3 years, it's not going to happen. And he had reasons, theories why, nobody wanted to fund it, and they were probably all correct, but it was essentially, sorry, it's done. And then a really amazing thing happened. People who had been following the project and fans of the project and fans of Don's, they wrote back and they said, come on, you got to make this movie. I could give you $10. And somebody else said, I got $50 I could give you. More and more people started saying this, and two guys in Franklin, just in their early 20s, Zach Pritchard and Jonathan Frazier, they sent us a little video and said, look, we don't have any money, but what if you did a Kickstarter campaign? And I knew what Kickstarter was at that point, but it was still pretty new. It was kind of in its infancy. And I went on Kickstarter and checked out to see, what kinds of things were being funded. And it was like somebody wants to make an album, or somebody wants to do a photo book or something like that. $15,000, $5,000. A few movies had gotten funded, but the most anybody had ever raised was like $50,000 for a film. Mm-hmm. And we needed $125,000. Our other investor said he'd match whatever we raised, but I said, sorry, you guys, I've had enough embarrassment in this process. I don't need another embarrassing situation with not being able to raise the money. And they said, do you have any better ideas? And I said, no. So we put it all together, and they turned it around in like a week. And they launched the campaign actually 2 days ago, a year ago. So what is that? We just hit the first year anniversary of the campaign, I think September 25th. And in 30 days, the campaign raised $350,000 from 4,500 people. And it's still kind of hard for me to talk about because the project was dead, and it was quite simply the biggest failure of my professional career, not being able to get this movie off the ground. And the fact that 4,500 fans of the project resurrected it by giving us $10, $25, $50 still blows my mind. And when we were putting the campaign together, what you do is you offer incentives. You want to give us $25, we'll send you a poster. $50, we'll throw in a T-shirt as well. $100, and we'll put your name in the credits at the end as an associate producer. The tactical mistake I made, because I didn't think it was going to happen, is I said, if anybody gives us $10 or more, I'm going to call you and thank you personally. And so, so I have a call sheet. It's in my car. It's 3,300 names. I am about 2/3 through the list. But I got to tell you, I love making these calls because everybody I call, I get to thank them for making this happen. If it wouldn't have been for these backers of the project, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Well, it has to be probably, and all the things you've done in your career, the most gratifying thing that's ever
really
happened.
was. It was the biggest surprise and the most humbling as well, because it just came out of nowhere.
So where does the movie stand right now?
So we finished shooting. We shot October and November in Nashville. Then we took a break while Marshall went back onto True Blood. And then he had a short break in January. We were able to shoot in Portland. We shot a couple days at Reed College and then downtown Portland, some other places. And then we've been editing, and we've just started doing some test screenings of the rough cut. And they're going really, really well. So right. I'm very happy. We're looking towards a release next April. So we haven't announced the date yet, but it's looking good.
That leads to my next thing. You know, in terms of marketing, and you know, you just don't go out there and just pull a date out of the air.
Right.
There's a lot of thought that has to go in
yes.
to what, and talk about that process and the marketing
right.
of
yes.
the process.
One of the things we decided early on after the miracle of the Kickstarter campaign was there's nothing traditional about this movie, so why should we try and go about kind of a traditional way of marketing the movie? And so as we're putting the plan together on how to roll it out, we're really trying to keep that in mind is, you know, we don't owe a studio any money. We're not, nobody else had Final Cut or anything like that. So why would we want to roll it out and make it look like a, you know, more traditional movie since that's just not what it is. So, I mean, we've got a big 60-page plan that we've put together, and it's all looking good. But, you know, ultimately we'll see if people show up when it opens.
What did you learn from doing The Second Chance that helped you in doing Blue Like Jazz?
Yes. Well, you know, The Second Chance was my first movie, and you don't. It's hard to tell somebody. I've got friends who are directors, and I would ask them for advice prior to The Second Chance, and you know, they kind of tried to warn me, but it's impossible to really tell somebody, just more than anything else, how exhausting it is directing a movie. And you know, I'm not telling you this to feel sorry for me by any means. I really enjoyed it, but it's like you're just being peppered with questions, and you've got to make decisions all the time, and you've got to be on and up. Like, you know, the first day, it's like, I just want to make the best movie possible. And by the fifth day, it's like, I just want to be able to stay awake for today. It's just really, really tiring. Yeah. If you saw Virgin Suicide, Sofia Coppola, the behind-the-scenes footage is really interesting because they've got a crew following her around, and her mom is on the set, and her mom's just saying, look how tired she looks. Look at her, and you look at her, and she barely has her eyes open. So it's just, you know, it's really exhausting above anything else, and that's why you want to be as prepared as possible. Overall, it was a really good experience. We had a great cast and a great crew because it was, you know, more of like a realistic drama. We cast probably 60% of the speaking roles with people who hadn't acted before. We had a lot of scenes with homeless people where we just hired homeless people, and you know, we just tried to make it as realistic as possible. And I can still watch the movie and be reasonably happy with the way it turned out. It was as good as I could make it, and all the mistakes are mine. And my goal with the new movie was to not repeat any of the same mistakes of the first one, so I try to make a whole lot of new mistakes on this new movie.
So it's a lot different, the comparison between doing, say, a short-form video as opposed to doing a full feature.
Well, those of us who have come out of music videos, we like to think we're making, you know, little mini movies, but in fact, all we're doing is creating images to go with the pre-existing soundtrack. Yeah. It's not quite the same, and it's a big jump, and frankly, it's a bigger jump than I thought it would be.
We talked about the success you've had with Meltdown in the 80s and also with Squint in the 90s. What made you decide to put what was a really very successful career as an artist on the back burner and go back to what you started out to be as a filmmaker?
Yes, I actually, at Colorado University, I was actually majoring in music, and it was like the equivalent of a film minor. They didn't have a department, a fully fledged department at that point. It was a department, but it wasn't officially, you couldn't major in filmmaking. So I took all the classes that I could there, and when I graduated, you know, the choice was, well, do I want to pursue music or filmmaking. And I decided it would be easier to be in a rock band in my 20s and a filmmaker in my 50s than to start as a filmmaker and then try to start a band in my 50s.
Yeah.
So I figured, maybe this would be the better order. But the idea was always to get into filmmaking eventually.
That was always there.
Right.
And you had incredible success. I mean, you toured the world, the Squint tour.
Right, yeah.
And seeing people around the world, that had to have an impact on you as a filmmaker and as an artist.
Right. International touring, honestly, that was almost one of the big goals in all this. It's like, I loved touring the U.S., but I would actually do anything to be able to do international dates. And so if all we did was break even, if it cost me to do them, I just loved touring internationally. So we did a lot of dates in Europe and Australia and just anywhere we could go. And in fact, I loved it so much that when it came time for the Squint album, the record label, I'd gotten to where I was doing, music videos, not just for myself, but for other artists. And they said, why don't you come up with a long-form video for this album? And so it sounds like a lot of money at the time. Back then, it wasn't all that much, but they said, we got $75,000. Why don't you deliver us a long-form? Just do whatever you want. So I got 4 round-the-world tickets on Delta Airlines at the time for like $3,500. You could fly anywhere that they fly, anywhere in the world. You just had to keep going the same direction. You couldn't backtrack. And so I brought along my cinematographer, Ben Pearson, and a sound guy, Russ Long, who actually graduated from Belmont, and then a road manager, Mark Hollingsworth. And we tried to figure out what would be the most kind of interesting settings to do music videos. And we went for as exotic places as we could find. So this was 1993. We thought it would be not fun to go to North Vietnam. I think it was already, reunified at the time.
Yeah.
We ended up being the first American film crew to be in North Vietnam since, they'd paraded POWs through the streets. So we're setting up in like Hanoi. We'd set up a shot and like literally thousands of people would gather around just to watch what was going on. And they hadn't seen Americans, since they shot them out of planes, right?
Yeah.
And I'm standing there at one point setting up a shot. We've got one Vietnamese interpreter with me, and I feel somebody like grabbing my legs. And I turn around, and a Vietnamese guy had grabbed my legs, ran back, and then he was laughing with his friends. And I said to our interpreter, what's going on? And she said, oh, he had a bet that you were standing on stilts. So, so it was just experiences like that the whole time. We were in Thailand, we went to Nepal, we were in the United Arab Emirates, in Turkey. We just tried to find really interesting settings as backdrops.
Pretty exotic
for
places.
music videos.
Yeah,
it was.
It really was.
A lot of good experiences.
Following that, Chagall Guevara, which was a mainstream band, you kind of stepped away from the Christian music.
Right.
What made you do that?
Yes.
What was going on?
This is back before all of your times, but back in the like 87, 88, I guess. I was working on what would have been my fourth album. When I started writing music, the idea was not to get signed to a Christian label. I went to LA and, took the songs around to mainstream record labels and got some appointments and was able to play them some songs. And the reaction, for the most part, was, well, we like your music, but the kind of this gospel-y kind of satirical, these lyrics, we think they would offend our listeners. And so, all right, well, I guess I could try Christian labels. And so I went to Sparrow and Word and the labels at the time then, and their reaction was, we don't like your music, and your lyrics
Because
would
it was
offend our listeners.
Too satirical, I guess.
Right, yeah. So, so I was, I mean, in many ways, just that very first experience kind of defined where I've lived life, kind of stuck between both places. And it was getting time to do this fourth album, and right around then was when like all these televangelist scandals happened. And Christian labels at the time were kind of panicky, and they didn't want to get tarred with the same brush, so, you know, a lot of artists at the time were doing albums trying to reassure their Christian audiences that, you know, I'm one of you. And I just didn't feel like doing that kind of an album. And so I told the band, look, this is probably going to be the last album. We'll do one more tour and then, you know, start looking for other gigs. And essentially retired at that point from Christian music. I wasn't upset with anybody. It just felt like it had gotten to a place where there wasn't any place further to go. And my wife and I moved to England for a while, and then some friends who were fellow Christians and kind of had kind of a similar feeling. We started talking, what if we started a band, and, you know, just the idea was to get signed to a pop label. So we formed this rock band. 2 of us were living in LA at the time, 2 were in Nashville. And I was in LA, but we decided it would be better for myself and the other guy that lived in LA to move to Nashville. There wasn't much of a rock scene here at the time, but it's a great place to tour out of, obviously. And so we moved here and started writing songs and doing the demos and started playing in a kind of the tri-state region, I guess. And got signed fairly quickly to MCA, and made a record that we still are happy with. And but things didn't go particularly well with MCA, which is. Do you even remember MCA? Does it still? Well, have you heard of that label? This Musician Cemetery of America.
Universal now, but
It's Universal. So we ended up kind of breaking up after the first album, and that's when I started getting into producing.
Yeah, what did you learn from being an artist that helped you as a producer when you started your producing roles?
Yeah. Well, I had a pretty big hand in producing my own albums anyway, and you know, I think it teaches you how to work with artists. You're hopefully a little more empathetic. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's the artist's album, so you want to bring as much as possible to the table, but, you know, you need to bring them along. And I really loved working with bands. I'm not sure if I ever produced any solo artists. I just liked the idea of getting in a studio with a band and seeing what we could come up with and how we could make things better. And I was always really tough on bands with lyric writing. I just don't have any patience for bad lyrics or lazy lyrics. And so in pretty much every situation I was working with Newsboys, Peter would write the music and I would write the lyrics. And that's pretty much how it went for most of the time I worked with them. With a band like Sixpence, Matt Slocum was already a really fine lyricist, and but, you know, he would tell you that I was still even pretty hard on him, sending him back and insisting that he, you know, this song still needs work, and, you know, this can be better. And I think Kiss Me went through about 4 different drafts before it finally got it to where it was needing to be. But
did that success with Sixpence and Kiss Me, did that surprise you in some way? Because that thing was a monster.
Well, the surprising thing was when Sixpence came to me, it was just to produce their record. They were signed to an independent label at the time, REX Records. And I started talking to them, we started planning out the album, and then REX went bankrupt. And so for a while it looked like everything would be fine and we'd just be able to get them, you know, set up in a new label. And then some company in Chicago bought REX, like the assets or something like that. And it was just some, you know, some finance guy jerk who came down to Nashville, and he really was a jerk. And he sat the band down at a table, and he took out their old contract, which was, you know, frankly abysmal. And I was with the band, and the first thing he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm friends of the band." And so he started reading the terms of their abysmal contract, and he might as well have been, you know, twisting his mustache. Not only am I going to enforce all this, but I'm going to enforce other things. And you know, it was shocking how what a bad guy this guy was. So the band and I, we left, and I went out to the parking lot, and it was so sad. One of the band members, the bass player, he just broke down and started crying in the parking lot because it would look so grim, you know? There was no way they could keep going as a band and not get paid anything, and, you know, it looked like the end of the band. So I did what any good producer would do. I took them to the pancake pantry because, you know, how can you be sad eating pancakes?
You can't.
And we sat around a table, and I said, look, you know, you're all bummed out because you're not making music. You're a band, and you should be making music, and instead, it's all this other stuff that's distracting you, right? So here's what we're going to do. I've got a credit card, and our engineer, Russ Long, who I mentioned before, went to Belmont, was an RA. He's willing to work on this project, too, for no money. We're just going to find a studio, and we're going to hole up in that studio, and we're going to make the record, and we'll figure the rest of it out. But we got to start making music. So we rented an empty studio that was next door to the Evil Empire's office. The office that we had just met this guy, and we went next door, unbeknownst to him, and we recorded the whole album next door to where his local offices were. And then we finished the record, and we were all really happy with it, but we still had this, you know, legal situation that we had to get out of. And so, and the band was just so exhausted from it all that, you know, I started saying, well, you know, we could potentially go this route, or we could talk to these labels, and they just didn't trust anybody. And so I ended up starting Squint Entertainment, the label, just to give Sixpence a home. And I, you know, I never run a record label, and I had no desire to run a record label. But there was plenty that I'd learned from being a recording artist that I thought labels could do better. And first off was, I don't like the way record labels work. I don't like the way they do business. I don't like the way they hide money. I don't like the way they charge, you know, essentially loan a band money, and then the band pays the money back, but they keep the masters in perpetuity. There was so many things that were screwed up about the way the record business was being conducted that it was like, if we're going to do this, we got to do a better version of this. And so I took the idea around to, I didn't have any money, but I took the idea around to a couple entities in town. And Word Entertainment, and a guy named Roland Lundy, who was head of it there, and Lauren Ballman, Jim Chafee, they all loved the idea. They were just being bought by Gaylord Entertainment. And so we structured a deal where I would set up shop under kind of the Gaylord umbrella. I'd have total autonomy to run the label. And Roland and I shook hands, and he said, we'll give you what you need to make this happen. And the goal at that point was not to have a, you know, I mean, we thought, we'll set it up. There's so many good acts coming out of Christian music, but they never get a shot. So what if we set it up to where we used the band's kind of fan base as a way to get things started, but, you know, the idea is to try to break them out to a wider audience. But we're still an independent label, you know? And I didn't want to go through Word's distribution deal with Sony because I didn't have much regard for the way they did things. So we went through an independent distributor and really did things, you know, with a really small staff. We had a bunch of interns from Belmont to help us out. And it took over a year, but that Kiss Me song, it just felt like a hit, you know? So we just kept working it and working it. I took the band over to Paris to shoot a music video there because, you know, that's what you do if you run the label, is you figure out a way to go to Paris. That was far and away the most extravagant thing we ever did. We spent $50,000 on a video in Paris, and the thing just started breaking through. It broke into the Hot 100, even though we were on an independent label. And I think what happens is we were taking them around the country, and they would set up in at radio stations. They would set up in like the lunchroom. And two things would happen when they played. Number one, they could really play their instruments, and that impresses radio people because that's not always the case. Right. And two, they were just so nice. And over and over again, we would hear back from people, you know, these jaded people at radio stations, "Wow, they're so nice," you know? And I think what happens is after a certain amount of those, these you know, radio stations decide, you know, if we're going to do one nice thing this year, let's do it for Sixpence because we like those guys, you know? It's a good song. They're nice people, very hygienic, you know, and they know how to play. Yeah. And so it broke, and then the song got added to on the soundtrack to this movie, She's All That, and that was a big hit and helped bust it wide open.
Boy, it really was.
Who knew?
Being an executive, because you kind of stepped out in another role as being an entrepreneur, because that's really what you did.
Right.
And I read somewhere, I heard somewhere that your rejection letters.
Right.
Explain to these students what that rejection letter sounded like.
Yes. Well, anybody here gotten a rejection letter? Because I have so many of them. Have you ever, I mean, it never feels good, right? And you get them and you feel, they're just like, mimeographed. They're very terse to the point, they tend to be. And you got to admit, it's nice to even get a rejection letter. Some people wouldn't even do that. But I just felt so badly that I was running this label, and everything that got submitted to us, I would give at least a shot. So lots of nights I would just stay up at the office like till 2 or 3 in the morning and just go through cassettes at the time and CDs and just pop them in and pull them out and at least listen to first minute of a song and then try a little bit of a second song, and if it was good, we'd pass some things around. And I don't know if we ever signed something just from a cold submission, but we try to give everything a shot. But you still have to let them know, sorry. And so I don't have the rejection letter, but I spent a lot of time writing the standard rejection letter, and it was essentially just, listen, sorry, it didn't quite do it for me, but I want you to keep this rejection letter so that you can wave it in front of my nose when you break it, and just remind me how wrong I've been. And the letter was a lot more artful than what I've said, but I don't know, I'll post it online or something if you want to take a look. Or
well, I think what it did, it was not, even though it was a rejection letter, it was an encouraging letter.
Yes.
And that speaks so well of the kind of man that you are.
Yes. Well, it was encouraging them to, go out there, succeed, and then take this letter and rub it in my face.
Yeah. Did that ever happen?
I have met people who had the rejection letters, brought them along with me, and I don't know that it's happened on any big degree, but there's certainly bands that have been signed.
But it wouldn't have to be musically. I mean, it's something they could carry with them and know that.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't the best singer, but I turned out to be a pretty good producer or whatever. The business has changed so much since the 80s, and how would you approach our students today to tell them what they need to be on the lookout for, as you did with Sixpence None the Richer?
Right. Well, when Sixpence was just breaking, we were invited to speak to a group called Leadership Music that some of you may be familiar with. And in fact, I ended up a few years later being a part of the Leadership Music year. And it's music leaders from primarily in Nashville, but also from New York and LA come together. It's like a secret society. You got to go once every Friday, once a month every Friday. You take your whole day and you learn different aspects of the music business. It's a really good program. Yeah. So they had us as their guests, and questions started rolling, and I told this group my philosophy that the music business is sick. It's corrupt. It's like the tax code. It doesn't make any sense the way you do business. And I said, and frankly, I've tried to do a better version of that corrupt system with Squint, but what really needs to happen is something needs to come around and just chop the legs out from under it, because it can't be fixed. It's so screwed up. The way business is done, the way contracts are put together, it's just a bad business, the way major labels operate. And it was right just a few years later that Napster hit for the first time. And of course, we saw the effect at Squint as well. Yeah. People downloading Kiss Me instead of buying the album. And so that was, 11 and 12 years ago. And of course, we've seen a sea change in the music business. And I am no longer actively involved in the music business and haven't been for 7 or 8 years. Yeah. So I'm not, on that regard, I'm not the best person to ask. But I'm happy that something big has happened. I have no empathy for the major labels. I guess I'm, now I'm not really sorry that any of this is happening. I really am not, because I don't think, we could talk about stealing music and pirating music and all that stuff, and we've all got opinions about that, but the major labels are getting what they have coming to them. And it's in many ways, it's just sweet justice. It's how it should have been a long time ago. So this, for a musician, this is a great time to be alive. It's a scary time as well. How do you make a living doing this? I don't know. But, you could pick your band, and you look at a band, maybe Arcade Fire is the biggest example of how it should be. And what's great about a situation like with Arcade Fire, and we could name 100 others, is it's good on two levels. Number one, the band really is controlling their own destiny. But number two, they have to act like adults as well. Because when major labels treat artists like children, guess what? Artists start acting like children, right? And so they want to be coddled, and they throw temper tantrums, and they, want it their way, and they get mad when it's not their way. And when you treat artists like adults, they respond like adults. And so, these situations should be partnerships. The artist should ultimately have the final say. And at the same time, if they want to make a record that doesn't have radio songs on it, then they need to be prepared for, what that means. It's a great time that we're living in, and hopefully we'll figure out how to make a living doing it.
As you step back and look at it, though, even though you're not directly involved, do you think that's why so many artists are now doing their own labels and their own music and doing it their way?
Yes, it's just not enough incentive to do otherwise. I mean, if you're an artist in the sense that you want to control your own destiny, you want to either, if not write your own songs, at least pick your own songs and shape your own image. Why would you sign with a major label? I would think that experience would be nothing but frustrating. And it's to the place where if a big band signs with a major label, unfortunately, we kind of look at them with suspicion, like, are you sure you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are still, we could name plenty of situations where great bands are signed to major labels and they get to do what they want and they're still in charge, but, when bands as big as, Radiohead or Coldplay don't necessarily know what's going on because they don't know who owns their record label today, that's not a good situation for bands. And so what you end up with those extra marketing dollars and promotion dollars, you lose so much. I'm hoping we come up with a better model, and it seems like it's emerging.
Well, better model is being formed by these young people out here right now.
Yes.
They're going to figure it out and take us into the future. Looking back on your career, what do you think your best work as a solo artist was?
Well, we usually like the last thing we did. Of course, the last album I did was in 1993. So that's it's hard for me to listen to past albums because they seem so much a part of their time production-wise. Right. But that's an album. The Squint album is one I can still listen to and be reasonably happy with. And the Chagall Guevara album, I think, is still really good.
We were talking about this earlier. What's interesting is I had a couple of young people come up to me and said they were so excited. They told their parents they were going to be coming this evening. They were going to see Steve Taylor. But you've kind of bridged two generations here now. You've got the parents because a lot of them in the 80s were listening to your music, and now a lot of these students are listening to your music or have seen your videos or seeing your films now.
Right.
So you've had a pretty big impact.
That's nice of you to say, I hope. I guess. We'll see.
Well, no, it's true. It's really true. Oh. It's really true. Speaking of the movie, how did you select the soundtrack for Blue Like Jazz?
Blue Like Jazz, right. I knew from the beginning that the movie is set primarily in Portland, Oregon. And Portland, we could call it, arguably the kind of the capital of American indie rock. Can we still do that? Maybe, maybe not. You'd probably argue, I guess. I mean, there's other cities that would, but it's certainly one of them, right?
It's a whole culture there.
Yeah. So the idea was, I really want this movie the soundtrack to sound like Portland. And there were different bands in Portland that I really liked, and some of the bands I knew. And there was a band in particular, Phenomena, that I'd seen Halloween night like 4 years ago at the Exit 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I'd come across them. I was at Grimey's and was, just looking around for stuff. And one of the guys at Grimey's said I should check this band out. It was their first album. And picked it up and really liked it, and ended up actually using one of those tracks for the last movie. And then I saw them live, and I actually gave them a copy of the Blue Like Jazz screenplay pretty early on. I said, could you check this out? This is the next movie I'm hoping to make, and I would love for you guys to be involved in the soundtrack. So the soundtrack is mostly Phenomena, and Danny, the drummer in Phenomena, has written some of the other music as well. Yeah. And there's some other Portland-based indie bands and a few bands here out of Nashville, but it's primarily that kind of indie rock soundtrack.
What's next for you?
Man, I don't know. I'm doing this until April. Like, the movie is like a full-time job. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay, but, well, if you see me, hanging around behind Bongo and, give a
That's
brother
his
a quarter.
office. Bongo is where his office is, by the way.
Yeah, right. I'm probably seeing all of you over there. They're going to kick me out eventually because I just take up space there. But I like working there. It's like I like noise around me.
It's a good vibe,
yeah. So yeah, we're doing screenings right now with a rough cut, and that'll take us through the end of the year, and then the beginning of next year we'll start doing sneak previews, and it just gets more and more involved, and I'm really involved in the marketing. So I'd love to do another movie project. I'm just trying to figure out what the next one's going to be.
Great.
And I'm hoping it doesn't take 5 years to get it funded.
Well, we thank you for your time to be with us on Insider's View this evening. We look forward to the spring, where we'll get to see Blue Like Jazz. And we thank you very much, Steve Taylor, for being with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks. Thank you.
This has been a production of the Mike Curb College of Entertainment and Music Business at Belmont University and Nashville Public Television.